possible universes, many possible meanings.
For more info on astrology readings and classes, check out levicosijn.com in the description box. Hi everyone, welcome to this YouTube channel. My name is Levi Cosijn, and today I'm speaking again with Anthony Lewis. Hi Anthony, how are you?
Levi, good to see you.
Today Anthony and I are going to talk about vocation and how to see it in the chart. Vocation is a complicated subject. I'm coming from the Gemini angle with this. I think Gemini Upadesa Sutras has many interesting, valuable things to say, practical things to say about astrologically determining one's vocation. I asked Anthony to delve a little bit into the Hellenistic literature and to do a presentation on vocation. So where would you like to start?
Okay, well, let me just tell you what I did. I prepared some slides. I will look at a couple charts. At your suggestion, I went carefully through the article on 7 Stars Astrology and read his primary sources and put together the slides trying to explain the concepts and flesh them out a bit. And so why don't we start with the slides? Okay, so I call this the astrology of praxis. Praxis being the Greek word that refers to what we do in the world, what we're recognized for, what people see us doing. Mm-hmm. And following your lead, I went carefully through this article, the 7 Stars Astrology article. Here's the link right here to the article. And he talks about what he calls the professional indicators. What are the planets that most have to do with one's profession or career or calling in the world? And generally, these are the faster moving planets, Mars, Mercury, and Venus, which were thought to be more related to what we as humans do on a daily basis, whereas the outer planets, Jupiter, Saturn, are very slow moving and tend to affect generations and whole societies rather than specific actions of individuals on a day-to-day basis. Mm-hmm. His sources primarily were Ptolemy, Paulus, 4th century, Rhetorius, 6th century, Anubio, 7th century. Okay. This is the article. I just did a screenshot of it for those who want to look for it. Excellent site, 7 Stars Astrology, goes over a lot of Hellenistic and the Arabic texts. Yeah. So the starting point is Ptolemy. Ptolemy has a chapter in his Tetrabiblos on profession or employment. That's chapter 4 of book 4. This, by the way, is available online. If you do a search for it, you can. It's worth reading. It's a fairly detailed chapter, not that long, but a lot of details. But the main point Ptolemy makes about profession is it relates to the sun and to the midheaven, the sign, the 10th sign from the ascendant, and the midheaven point itself.
Yes.
I think the idea here is the sun is the most visible, quote, planet in the sky. It's what we can all see and notice, and the midheaven is the highest, most noticeable sign in the horoscope. And so if we look at what people do, we're looking at how do they display themselves to the world. That's their profession or calling. And Ptolemy gives 3 key points, which are then elaborated by later astrologers. What planet rises just before the sun? Comes up first in the heavens on the day of your birth. What planet is in the midheaven? And this can be extended to planets that rule the midheaven or aspect the midheaven. And what planets receive an application from the moon? That is, what is the moon applying to? What planets is the moon applying to? Because the moon kind of activates, it's a mediator between the heavens and earth. And so planets that receive this application of birth get especially highlighted.
Yes.
And so what I did is I pulled up a chart and I thought we could go through it and try to guess this woman's profession, or at least broad categories. I mean, you can't really pinpoint. There's so many different professions, but you can pinpoint talents and activities that will be highlight in this person's life. So in astrology, we usually start with the ascendant. Here, the ascendant sign is Virgo, a Mercury-ruled sign, and Saturn's in the ascendant. The ascendant has to do with our sense of identity and our talents, resources. So whoever this person is, whatever she does, she will make use of her ascendant and its attributes in her profession. So she might have a mercurial profession, a Saturnian profession. Maybe she's real serious or does things that require a lot of detail and persistence and rigor. She's no nonsense, maybe. These are personality traits, but we all express our personalities through the work that we do. Specifically, though, the house or sign that has most to do with our career is the 10th. And notice I'm using whole sign houses in Hellenistic. The whole signs are the, as in Jyotish, are the topics.
Yes.
And again, we have Mercury ruling the 10th. So now we have a double emphasis. Virgo rising ruled by Mercury, Gemini midheaven ruled by Mercury, and the midheaven point is in 16 Gemini, which happens to be in the Venus term, right? Whoops, get rid of that junk. The Venus term. So maybe Venus plays a role, but Mercury predominates here. Next, we're going to look at the angles, the most important angle being the 10th, but the other angles, any planet in an angle is going to have a major impact or be dominant or visible in the life. We already talked about Saturn being visible, Jupiter's visible, and down here in the 4th, the Sun and Mercury. So again, we have you see how Mercury keeps coming up.
Yes.
And then we look at the moon. What is the moon applying to anything? Well, it's applying to Mercury and Mars.
Yes.
So this profession will predominantly have to do with Mercury and have some influence of Venus and Mars now. And of course, Saturn and Jupiter are going to be prominent in the life and will affect the profession in some way. We're focusing mainly on the faster moving planets because they have more to do with our actions day to day. And then we want to look what rises before the sun. Well, here, if the sun were to rise, Saturn would have risen before it. So Saturn gets a special prominence in the life of this person.
Yeah, so this is primary motion, right?
And yeah, the way the sky moves, the sky moves this way.
Yeah.
Rises in the east, culminates in the south, sets in the west. Remember, the astrology was invented in like Babylon, Mesopotamia.
Right.
They were north of the ecliptic. And
Yes.
so when they looked at these planets going around the ecliptic, they had to face south to see the ecliptic. And so the east was to their left. They would look to the south to see the midheaven region, and things would set over here in the west.
Sure. This is where the whole visual representation comes from.
Yeah.
Is what you're saying.
And so we're talking about things rising. The sun is here. She's born around midnight. Here's the midnight point. This would be sunrise. Well, when the sun gets here, Saturn's up here. It's already risen. So Saturn will play a role in her life. Saturn, by the way, rules the 5th and 6th. So maybe her profession is going to have something to do with 5th house, children, fun, entertainment, 6th house, service, things like that, doctors, nurses, police, whatever. But we're more interested in the faster moving planets. And here we notice that Mercury doesn't rise just before the sun, but it becomes visible in the sky just after the sun sets. Right?
Yes.
So if the sun is on the western horizon, if the sun were here, Mercury would be up here setting. And Mercury is far enough away from the sun, it's 19 degrees, to just have become visible. And this is another Hellenistic principle. When planets just become visible in the sky at the horizon, they're very prominent in the life and in the profession. So now we have Mercury super emphasized. So, and what do you think she did for a living?
Yeah, so that's what I think she actually did.
I mean, again, we're talking broad categories, making use of her talents, and she's
Yeah,
going to
I
make
think
use of Mercury in her profession.
right, right. So it would have been something intellectual. I do see Jupiter also quite. Mercury is in the sign of Jupiter. The ascendant is in the term of Jupiter.
Jupiter's angular, Jupiter's in its own sign, yeah.
Right. Aspecting. Yeah, so some kind of teaching, perhaps.
So this is the chart of Louisa May Alcott. She's the author. She was born in the 19th century and wrote several books for children, the most famous of which is Little Women, which became a movie a few years ago.
Right, so that's the Jupiter coming in, and then, of course, the writing skill.
Right, so Mercury, certainly communication, writing.
Right, yeah.
And the midheaven in Venus, so there's an artistic flair.
Right.
The Mars emphasis, Mars is in the 9th house, which has to do with publishing, disseminating information.
That's clear. Yeah, and that would also be storytelling more. Like I think
storytelling. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And the Saturn rising before the sun, even though it's not one of the fast action planets, it's prominent. And Saturn rules the 5th of children. She wrote children's books. And the 6th, she actually worked as a nurse.
Right. I think that's perhaps also, I mean, I don't know if that in Hellenistic is, but Venus would represent that. And also the term of Venus, I mean, the MC is in the bound of Venus, and Venus is also in the 5th house, right? In the term of Jupiter, right? So, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, so I think this is a good illustration of, I don't think it's that easy to pinpoint a profession, but we can describe the profession, what she's actually doing and what talents she's making use of, and what areas of life it might involve.
I want to ask you a question, Anthony.
Sure.
To make it more detailed or more concrete, don't you look at the 12 parts?
You can, yeah. I didn't include that in these slides because that's another detailed technique, but yes.
All right, okay. So
the 12 parts were considered, it's basically the Dwad kind of chart in Jyotish.
Dwada Samsaya.
Were considered kind of a hidden chart within a chart, which if you use them would flesh out more details. I didn't include Dwads in this because there's so much other material to go over.
Sure. I think it's good that people know that they can use Dwada Samsa and also apply it in the same way that we just did with the terms. Right. You know, looking at whatever the planet is doing in terms of that division, and then draw some information out of that.
Okay, so let me go on. Oh, these are just dignities. These are dignities I use. I'll come back to those. Ptolemy Book 4, as I mentioned, I just will put this here to show you. There are several sites that have available online Ptolemy's entire text, and we're interested in Book 4, Chapter 4. In this translation, it's called The Quality of Action. I think in the other translation, it was called The Quality of Employment, but it's the same chapter.
All right.
I'm not going to read the fine print here. Praxis. So we already said praxis refers to what we do in the world, our actions, our deeds, the business that we carry out, etc. And in Hellenistic astrology, praxis was especially the province of the 10th place, the 10th sign from the ascendant. And it had to do more with the swifter planets, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, which were called the lords of action, meaning our personal actions. And as I said before, Jupiter and Saturn are really slow moving and tend to be affect more historical trends, generational trends, societal trends.
I think it's interesting that, in the Gemini Sutras, he doesn't give a specific profession for Saturn, right? Which is the slowest moving. So that was one of the things that really caught my attention reading through this article, that Mercury, Venus, and Mars, the faster moving, were actually doing it, or are the planets to consider to determine the main actions from. So I think there's also some overlap with what was happening in the Vedic angle.
Yeah, the Jupiter Sun will modify how Mercury, Venus, and Mars behave, but they're not fast actors. They move so slowly that symbolically they don't symbolize what you do every day.
Yes.
They symbolize this decade, what you might be working on. But not when the alarm clock goes off. You think, what am I going to do today? That's more the faster moving planets.
So, but any of the planets that are aspects, so let's say Mercury, Venus, and Mars get aspected by either Jupiter or Saturn, will get also that influence. So in terms of what Mars and Jupiter, or Saturn and Jupiter may represent as house lords and so on.
Yeah, like we saw in Louisa May Alcott. Yes. Her Saturn did rise before the sun. It's very prominent. And it rules her 5th and 6th. And she worked writing children's books in an entertainment field and as a nurse, 5th and 6th.
And it was in the sign of Mercury. I mean, and there was...
Right, in the sign of Mercury. She was serious about her writing. She was also a feminist, so she had a very stern ethic.
Yes.
She was proving that women could make it in the world. So it's, I think, a Saturnian theme there.
Right. So, and that we'll consider later if Saturn or Jupiter were actually aspecting that Mercury, that 10th cusp lord.
Oh, let's go back.
Just to have yeah, they do actually.
They
26,
do.
26. Yeah. Okay, makes a lot of
sense.
sense.
They all do, yeah. Saturn and Jupiter are opposite, and they're aspecting the Mercury by a square. The Saturn is really closely connected by planetary aspect to the Mars.
Yes.
And she was a very forceful feminist.
Yeah. She was a forceful feminist. Okay. Strong Jupiter also.
Let's go on. This just to illustrate, I think, part of the theory. This was the Ptolemaic worldview, that the planets formed sort of spheres around the Earth at the center of the universe. And each planet's orbit was one of these spheres, but the planets themselves moved in epicycles on their orbits. Okay. So the planet would go around the Earth, but the planet itself would go like this in these little epicycles.
Yes.
And that would account for retrograde motion. And in Ptolemy's theory. As you can see, the Earth is surrounded by the moon. It's the closest planet. So the moon is the mediator between everything else and the Earth. And that's why these applications from the moon to planets bring their influences down to Earth for the individual. And then the 3 fastest non-luminary planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, have to do with our actions on Earth. And these outer planets have to do with things that go more slowly. The society we live in, societal trends, cultural trends, historical trends. Okay. This is the same sort of diagram from an older text. You can see the planets here, the fixed stars and the zodiac out here, and the Earth in the middle. Okay, so the method then is to study these swift lords of action and see how they predominate, what with respect to the parts of the chart that have to do with career. And those parts, starting with Ptolemy and then elaborated by these later authors, were considered the effective whole signs. And by effective, they meant the 4 angles, because planets in the angles have a prominent effect. The 4 succedent places, which were a little less powerful than the angles, but still powerful. The cadent places were considered very weak and not very influential and not very visible. But the sixth place, because the sixth is trine to the 10th, was thought to, even though it's cadent, was thought to have a major impact on career, as was the second. The second is trine to the 10th. So 2, 6, and 10 were considered this career triangle. And planets in that triangle you had to pay attention to. And then I think it's Paul, I don't remember who says this. If, and maybe even me and Ptolemy, if planets don't appear in any of these effective places, what do? Does a person not have a career? No. You look at the lot of fortune, and you turn the chart so the lot of fortune is considered a substitute or surrogate ascendant. Okay. I think in Jyotish you do this more with the moon than the lot of fortune. You look at the chart from the point of view of the actual ascendant, and then you look at the chart from the point of view, what if the moon were rising and everything else was evaluated with respect to the moon in the first? Well, here it's the same idea, but you're using the lot of fortune. It turns out the lot of fortune is the lot of the moon. So it's very equivalent to the Jyotish looking at the lunar chart, lunar rising chart. And so if you have a chart that doesn't have planets in these effective places, you then look at the derived or turn chart and put the lot of fortune in the first place and see how everything relates to the lot of fortune. And you read the chart the same, using the same principles. Again, the most important places are the 10th, first, because the first is the ascendant, your personal identity, who you are, the talents you have. The second and sixth, because they are trine to the midheaven. And I wrote here, the ascendant sign reflects your temperament, your talents, your sense of identity. And these are all factors that will play out in your profession, right? A person with a very militant ascendant, say, very active Mars or maybe Aries rising, is not likely to become a dressmaker, for instance.
Yes.
I guess it's possible, but.
Yeah, that is also in the Jaimini Sutras very clear, the prominence of the first,
Although maybe the same person could become a very prominent fashion designer who's flashy and enterprising. So the temperament has to play out in the career. That's the idea. And do any of these planets have dignity in the first? Any of these lords of action have dignity in the first? In the Louisa May Alcott chart, we had Mercury had dignity in both the first and the 10th. So Mercury just jumps out of her chart as the dominant planet.
Right.
Okay. And so these are some key words related to these three lords of action. This is not exhaustive, but this gives you sort of ballpark images to think about. Well, let's start with Mercury, because Louisa May Alcott, this was her dominant lord of action, right? Messenger of the gods. So maybe she's some kind of a messenger. Mental activities, letters, writing, thinking, cleverness, theft. Mercury was a thief. Wit, communication, travel, language, teaching, invention, sales, commerce, accounting, calculation, augury, making predictions, astrologers. Quickness, dexterity, athletics, youth, skillful use of hands, arms, or tongue. So these are the sorts of activities Mercury might symbolize. And let's go through the other two. Mars, god of war, martial activities. Mars likes to fight, to compete, use force, energetic exertion, penetration, severing, cutting things. Bloodletting, bearing arms, physical and muscular exertion. Adultery is listed. I don't know if that's a profession, but I guess for some people it might be. The use of fire or heat, use of tools made of iron, use of machines. These are sort of Mars-type activities.
Is it not also connected to politics, Mars, from the Hellenistic angle more?
It may be. I was copying a list from the sources. So
Sure. I was thinking about, Perhaps Mars is also connected to politics there. I think I read that.
Yeah, it may
Anyway.
be. Well, it's competing and exerting yourself energetically.
Sure. Yeah.
Certainly,
So on
politics involves competition.
yes, on a higher level, let's say.
Yeah. And Venus, goddess of love, has sort of beauty, adornment, harmony, music, fashion, luxury, jewelry, design, symmetry, pleasure, merriment, fun, entertainment, acting, artists, dancers, song, venereal activities, sexual desire, courtesans, escorts.
Yeah.
And I copied these lists from Ptolemy and Rhetorius and Paulus. They're not exhaustive, but these are keywords that keep coming up.
All right.
But you can get a general. So here I just took pictures of these gods as archetypes. And so here's Mars, Aries. He's sort of the muscular, athletic guy who likes to compete and win. Here's Venus, sort of the voluptuous goddess of love. She likes to please and have fun. She's the party girl. And here's Mercury, Hermes. The Romans called this planet Mercury. In the Hellenistic times, it was the god Hermes, of an Egyptian Greek god, who was noted for his cleverness. He invented things, invented writing, gave writing to humanity. And he was considered very quick, nimble, likes to outsmart others. That's where the thief comes in. But also fairly athletic. Hermes was the god of athletes, interestingly. Okay, so Paulus, and I think the Seven Stars Astrology article bases itself primarily in Paulus. So I thought it'd be worth going through Paulus to see exactly what he said. So this is a translation by James Holden, and you'll see that it's going to repeat a lot of what we've already talked about. Because of its quickness, the topic of action is apprehended from the stars that are swift, Mars, Venus, and Mercury. What he's saying here is the action we do day to day in our life, in our careers, involves fairly rapid movement, rapid activity. And so it's got to be represented by rapid planets. But I do not mean that every art and science can be perceived from these three stars. This is important.
Sure.
He's saying even though Mars, Venus, and Mercury are the most important things to look at, don't think that just by looking at them you're gonna be able to pinpoint every art and science that a person might be involved in. So the implication here is you got to look at the whole chart and what else is going on, what is affecting these three lords of action. And the houses or places that are especially serviceable for these planets to be in, the presence of these planets, are the angles, the succedent houses, the sixth, with the 10th being particularly preferred among the angles, the 10th being preferred, and the second, and that's that 2, 6, 10 triangle he's talking about. Continuing, if none of these stars, Mars, Mercury, Venus, are placed in one of these effective houses, nor with the lot of fortune. So remember, if after looking at the planets in the regular chart, if none of them are in these effective houses, we look at them in the lot of fortune chart. And if even in that chart, you don't have any planets being highlighted, it is proper to inquire. You got to look further into the chart. You got to go to another level of analysis. Is one of them being applied to by the moon or by the sun? Because the lights will stress a planet, emphasize a planet. Or whether by chance Saturn, Jupiter, or Mars has made its morning appearance, meaning rising before the sun. We saw it in Louisa May's chart, Saturn rose before the sun. Or in the case of Venus or Mercury, it's evening rising. And in Louisa May's chart, we have Mercury rise, right? Mercury appeared after the sun set. And he gives a range here within 7 days before or 7 days after the birth. So you don't just look at the birth chart itself. You go 7 days forward in time, 7 days backward in time to see if one of these planets stands out, appears or disappears within that 15-day period, the date of birth and 7 days plus or minus.
Mm-hmm.
And those become very prominent planets in the life and career of the person. And if one of these stars is found that has one or more of these relations that he mentions, the criteria, it is necessary to declare the quality of action by taking a suitable characteristic of the force of that star. So we know the key words for these stars, and we see which ones are highlighted, and then we use the key words to figure out a kind of profession. 3, while there are 4 angles and 4 succidents and 4 cadence, it must be known that sometimes also the cadence are effective, and they produce an action that is not one that happens in accordance with the usual astrological signification. Here he's saying cadent houses usually are dismissed as being relatively weak and not prominent. But when one of the stars is in a cadent house and casts its rays within 3 degrees by trine he's really talking to the midheaven or a planet in the midheaven, that will emphasize that planet. So here, I think here he's more talking about the 6th or the 2nd house. And if there's a planet there that's very closely aspecting either the midheaven degree within 3 degrees or a planet in the 10th within 3 degrees, then that planet becomes highly prominent in the career. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of detail in this. And he gives the example, suppose that 15 Taurus is on the midheaven, and there's a planet 16 Capricorn in the 6th house. Then the planet in the 6th is trine, the planet is trine the MC degree. Within 1 degree, it will become effective with regard to career.
That makes a lot of sense.
And that's the example that he gives. This is Paulus. Anubio. Now, 7 stars dismisses Anubio, says he found it doesn't reliably work.
Yeah.
I haven't tested it enough, but the charts I've looked at it, and it does seem to work. So, but I've just looked at a small number. Mm-hmm. So I think the jury is out. But Anubio had this idea, and this is a big idea in Hellenistic, that the new or full moon before your birth is really important. And in fact, Ptolemy used it as one of his indicators for how long the person will live. Mm-hmm. And so what I'd like to do is go through the chart of Bruce Lee, which is a really interesting chart. He's a complicated guy with a lot of talents and has a chart that you really have to think about carefully to see if you can see how his career plays out. Okay. Mm-hmm. And we'll look at the syzygy or new or full moon before his birth to see if that reflects his career as well. So Bruce Lee was born in 1940, November 27th, San Francisco, 7:12 a.m., so around sunrise, according to his birth certificate. So it's a pretty reliable chart. Yeah. We have the birth certificate, it gives this time. So we know the time is more or less accurate. He was born on a Mercury day, a Wednesday during a Mercury hour. And so right there, we're seeing that Mercury is emphasized in his chart. Right? Mercury day, Mercury hour. And Mercury was a ruler of agility, athletics, quick movement, dexterity.
He was actually very eloquent, Bruce Lee.
Yeah. A good communicator.
Yeah, he was a good communicator. We dealt with his chart, right, when we did the primary
we looked at
directions.
His chart. I think we looked at his death in his chart using
we did.
Primary directions. So the rest of the talk, I'd like to go through his chart and apply these principles. And
great.
It's not as straightforward as Louisa May Alcott. So
Yeah, I was
it's a
kind of
good
hoping
split.
for that because some charts, I guess, would be very, very tricky.
But this is a tricky one,
Yeah.
I think.
Yes.
So here I put up Mercury because he's born on a Mercury day during the first hour of the day, which is the Mercury hour of the day. And the Greeks linked the Roman Mercury to the Greek god Hermes, who was, I quoted from this site, Greek gods and goddesses, the god of trade, so commerce, thieves, travelers. He did travel a lot, sports, athletes, border crossings, and the guide to the underworld. Hermes was the patron and protector of travelers, herdsmen, thieves, orators, wit, literature, poets, athletics and sports, invention and trade.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And this is what he was depicted as looking like. Kind of looks a little like Bruce Lee. So Bruce Lee, this is from biography.com, just so we have some facts about his life. He's a revered martial artist, actor, filmmaker, known for movies like Fists of Fury, Enter the Dragon, and a martial arts technique that he developed, a composite of many other techniques. Actor, director, martial arts expert, a child actor in Hong Kong, who later returned to the US. So there's the travel. Taught martial arts, that could be mercurial. Starred in a TV series, The Green Hornet. Became a box office draw. And he died very young at the age of 32. Still not clear what he died of. So if we're thinking about this with even out having a chart, we're thinking martial artist, we might think Mars is active in his chart. Actor, we might think Venus, or if we're using modern planets, Neptune. Right? Filmmaker, the same, maybe Venus, Neptune, maybe fifth house. Movies, again, sort of Venus, Neptune. Actor, we're thinking Venus. Director might be more like Mars, Mercury. Martial arts, Mars, maybe Mars, Mercury. Child actor, I'm not sure what I'd think of there. Teacher, maybe Mercury, Jupiter.
Yeah, Venus also, I think. But it depends on
Star in a series and star in films, maybe the sun is prominent. Do you have other thoughts about what we might expect in this chart?
Well, I think the sun would definitely give prominence, or the moon as the king and the queen. And then, yeah, I'm just looking at it. Some of these connotations are different, like acting would definitely also be a Mercury.
Reading the biography,
yeah,
what kind of chart would we imagine before we actually look at the chart?
Yeah, definitely some Mars and Mercury influence.
Yeah. Maybe Enter the Dragon, because maybe the nodes are important.
Probably. I think definitely the nodes would be important.
And Fists of Fury, that's got to be Mars, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go on.
Sure.
He studied dance. That was interesting. He was a dancer.
Oh, yeah.
He won a cha-cha competition. He became known for his poetry. So here's sort of a Venus influence, right? Or maybe Neptune, if we're using Neptune. He worked as a dance instructor. He, at the university, studied philosophy and drama.
Yeah, I think that would be the Jupiter. I mean, the philosophy part, and then
right,
the drama.
Probably Jupiter. The drama might be, I don't know, Venus, Sun.
Or Mercury, yeah.
Got a job teaching martial arts, and opened his own school. Okay. And as a teenager, he took up with local gangs. So he's a bit of a juvenile delinquent as a teenager.
Yeah, so that ties in with the Mercury stuff.
Gang member. Began to learn kung fu to defend himself. So probably there were fights in these gangs and he wanted to not get beaten up. He took dance lessons, refined his footwork and balance, won the Cha-Cha Championship, developed his own martial arts technique, which was a blend of kung fu, fencing, boxing, and philosophy. Interesting. he's a very interesting guy. His praxis or his actions in the world, what did he do? Well, he was an actor, a film star with athletic prowess, martial artist, somewhat of a philosopher. He introduced nunchucks, these weapons made of iron and I guess wood.
Yeah.
He made films, danced, taught, studied philosophy and drama, wrote poetry, philosophy, and movie scripts. So it looks like everything's going to be prominent in this.
Yeah, I
guy's
think,
chart.
I mean, he's a performer. That would be like
Yeah.
probably the gist of it.
Yeah.
He's a performer, this guy.
Okay, so here's the chart. Oh, no, this is the yeah. What I did here, getting back to Anubio. So inside is his birth chart. He has 6 of Sag rising. Here I use the quadrant houses with porphyry. And the outer wheel is the full moon before his birth.
Mm-hmm.
So Anubio said the full moon before the birth and whatever planets that moon is highlighting are going to be reflected in his career.
Right.
So his full moon is at 22 Taurus, and it's opposing, God is opposing everything over here because he has this huge stellium in Scorpio.
Yeah.
And it's past the opposition. It's separating the opposition to Scorpio. And its next aspect will be the opposition to the sun.
Mm-hmm.
His natal sun, which is right on the ascendant. He's born just after sunrise. And so, according to Anubio, a major component of his career is the sun in Sagittarius here. And
I mean,
I think,
major component as in prominence in this case, right?
right, that he, prominence and public display, showing himself to the public. Right? And the sun could also be directors. He was a filmmaker. So the sun becomes prominent. I said the sun will play a starring role in his career, but the sun could also be someone who plays a starring role in a film, right?
But it's also the ninth lord, which could relate to the philosophy and so on. I mean, the
Right.
sun is also ideology, and it
Mhm.
is in the sign of Sag.
Right, the ninth lord.
Right.
And right. And matters of a foreign nature, and certainly he introduced foreign martial arts to the United States. So this Anubio would say, this has got to be important, the sun. Okay. Here's his chart. I use this format partly because it's kind of a Hellenistic looking chart. And it keeps the signs as separate houses. So at his birth, he has the sun in Sag right on the ascendant. And remember, the angular houses are very important. And the only angular planet he has is the sun.
Yes.
And then we next look at the succeedent.
That's already a powerful yoga, the ninth lord in the first house in good dignity. Close as close to the ascendant, because that would make it even more prominent, which is a Raja.
Yeah, and you would interpret that how?
As a Raja, as a kingly position, especially because it is doubly emphasized by the fact that it's the sun. But the sun is is the powerful trine, or the most powerful trine lord, which would be the ninth at the first house, which is an angle. So whenever you mix angles and trines, you get these powerful combinations. And in his chart, the ninth lord is the powerful planet for Sagittarius ascendant. So it is on the... Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we expect him to stand out and be prominent in some way.
Yeah, and also to follow the ninth house, and also a strong dharmic inclination. So dharma in the sense that following his path, following his inspirations, and that's most certainly what he did, reading all, the things that he was involved with. And I mean, he was young, right? He died at 32.
Yeah, died at 30. And then Paulus says, look at the angles. We don't have any of the action planets, Mars, Mercury, and Venus in the angles. So next we look in the succedent houses, and they're empty of planets.
Mm-hmm.
We have the node here, but it's not a planet. And so we don't have any action planet in an angle. We don't have any action planet in a succedent house. Then we look at the second and the sixth to see if there's an action planet. The second, because they're trying to the midheaven, is already succedent and has nothing trining them here. The sixth has Jupiter and Saturn. They're not action planets, but the sixth is a potential house related to career. But Jupiter and Saturn are not in close aspect to the midheaven degree or to a planet in the 10th.
Mm-hmm.
So they become less prominent in that regard. And so he doesn't meet any of the criteria that Ptolemy or Paulus set out, or at least Paulus set out, for effective planets being in effective houses. He has no action planets in effective houses, but he had a very prominent career. So what are we missing? Well, the next step is, Paulus says, if that's the case, look at the part of fortune and the houses from the part of fortune as the first. And if we do that, this becomes the new first house, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all three action planets are with the part of fortune in the first house, so really prominent.
Yes. And also, aspected by the moon. Moon is
Right.
making it even more prominent.
Right. And the moon is especially because it's applying to Mercury, highlighting the Mercury here. So we do have Mercury highlighted from the point of view of it rules the midheaven, and it's highlighted by the moon. And Mercury, in Ptolemy's view, is the planet that rose just before the sun. Here's the sun and sun rising. Just before the sun rose, Mercury rose. So Mercury really stands out in this chart.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Continuing. Guests and hosts. Just going through more concepts from Hellenistic.
Sure.
This is from Demetra George's book. When one planet is received as a guest in the home of a host planet, meaning the sign of a host planet, the guest planet lacks access to its own resources and must look to its host to provide the resources it needs to do its business on behalf of the individual. The more of its own dignities that a planet occupies, the more favorable the outcome it can bring. And when a planet occupies its own domicile, it has the power of resources and self-sufficiency. And these are the dignities used in Hellenistic, the domicile, which is a sign, the exaltation, triplicity, and term. The Hellenistic astrology did not use what we call face or decan. That was added later by medieval astrologers. And we saw this is just a list of dignities. So getting back to Bruce Lee, we see all his lords of action are in the 12th, but they're with the part of fortune, so it's as if they were in a first house. And this house is ruled by Mars. So Mars becomes really dominant because Mars rules the part of fortune, and all the other planets here are not in their own house, so they have to rely on Mars for the resources to do their thing. So this makes Mars especially prominent as well. So we saw Mercury was very prominent for the reasons we already mentioned. And now Mercury has to act through Mars. Mercury is in Scorpio, ruled by Mars. And so for Mercury to do anything, it has to rely on Mars to get it done. And so we have this Hermes-like Mercury energy being filtered through the kind of competitive, athletic nature of Mars.
Sure. So we're looking at the lot of fortune.
Yep.
And we're looking at it, so we take that as an ascendant. So from there we see that the sun occupies the second, and that
Right.
the Jupiter and Saturn occupy also the eighth, which is the eighth, or also one of these important, or
Well, no, here it will be the seventh from fortune, right?
it's the seventh
This is
from.
the
I was
12th,
looking. Yeah, it's the seventh from fortune, so it's an angle. That's what I'm saying. So
right?
all these planets then would become prominent in light of what
Right.
we've just seen about these prominent
Right. And then
places
the sun, which conjoins the natal ascendant, is ruling the 10th space, right,
from.
from the fortune.
Yeah. Yeah, so that would make it, and also you could look at it from the moon even, because moon is also in.
Right.
I
Moon
mean,
is also here. So if we're
if
doing
you,
Jyotish, it would be the
yeah,
same as doing it from part of fortune.
exactly, and you could also in judges also do it from the sun even, which then conjuncts the ascendant.
Right.
So it's
Right.
powerful from.
Right. But the Paulus method is if you're not getting much information from the regular chart, next look at the chart from the point of view of part of fortune rising.
Right.
And then the chart just lights up that these planets are extremely prominent in his career, especially the Mercury, but also especially the Mars. And it's kind of a toss-up which is more important. I mean, I lean toward Mercury being more important, but Mercury has to go through Mars because Mars is its dispositor.
Yeah, I think
And
Mars is Mars in Scorpio is powerful. I'm not sure about the other dignities that Mars is in, but we could look perhaps at
yeah, I think I did
prominence.
that at some point.
Hmm.
Now, the other thing I did, this is not in Paulus, but I also look at the nonagesimal. I think we talked about this once
Yeah.
before.
Hmm.
There are 2 points in the sky that are considered the highest point. There's the midheaven, which is when the sun reaches that point, it's the highest point in the sky. But at the moment of birth, the highest point in the sky is the so-called nonagesimal, measured just by looking at the sky. And the nonagesimal is basically the point that's 90 degrees from the ascendant up in the 10th place here.
Hmm.
And 90 degrees from the ascendant would be 6 of Virgo.
Yeah.
And if we do that, we see that this Jupiter and Saturn are very closely trying that 6 of Virgo.
Yeah.
So they become prominent in the career as well, especially the Jupiter, which is much closer. It's about a degree away.
Yes.
So now we have Jupiter playing a role. And after his death, his writings were published, and he has a book, basically is a philosophy, right? The philosophy of Bruce Lee. I just said all this, the nonagesimal being 90 degrees from the ascendant in the sky at the moment of birth. And here's his book. The book on Amazon, here's a description. Legendary martial artist Bruce Lee formulated a complex personal philosophy. So I think this is the Jupiter being prominent, synthesizing Eastern and Western ideals, etc.
And also the sun, this ninth lord on the ascendant, right? His ideals.
Right.
Yeah, as a ninth lord.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So people who don't even watch his films are now reading his book here. It was published posthumously, so they gathered together his writings and published them.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. I think we've said all this. He had all 3 lords, and the Cadent 12th, you'd think they weren't very strong, but because they're with the part of fortune, which is an alternate ascendant, they become very prominent. And all the planets are the guests of Mars, so they'll have to act through Mars, so Mars becomes prominent. And Mars has the most dignity of any planet in this chart. So Mars has a lot going for it. Let's see. Here we can see, here I put the lot of fortune rising.
Mm-hmm.
So all the planetary positions are the same, but I just turned the chart to make the ascendant be Scorpio.
Right.
And we can see that Mars at 4 of Scorpio is in the bound of Scorpio. It's in the sign of Scorpio. And Scorpio is one of the triplicity rulers of, Mars is one of the triplicity rulers of water signs. Scorpio is a water sign. So Mars has 3 dignities to its name.
Yeah.
It clears the most dignified planet in the chart. And what else can we say here? I think that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, so can you repeat that? So it's Mars is in its own sign. It's in term of Venus, is what you're saying?
No, Mars is at 4 of Scorpio.
Right,
And
right.
it looks like this
Now
is
I
the
see
first, I can't tell if it's 6 degrees, I'd have to count.
Sure.
But Mars is in its own term.
Yeah, it's
Venus
own
is in the
term.
term of Mars.
Yeah. Okay.
So Mars is so triply dignified by
Yeah.
essential dignity.
Yes.
I think it's, in this chart, it looks to me like Mercury is really prominent and Mars is almost equally prominent. So this is a Mars-Mercury kind of person, probably Mercury-Mars, which fits martial artist and his skill with words. Let's see.
Sure.
Mercury has dignity only by term, but see, Hellenistic gets into all these subtleties. So it has some dignity by term. It's not a great dignity, but it's dignified. It's in the same hemisphere as the sun. What they're talking about here is that a sect of a chart. Charts are divided into day charts and night charts.
Mm-hmm.
Day charts are charts where the sun has risen, is above the horizon. And because Mercury rose before the sun, it's considered a diurnal or masculine planet. And it's more comfortable being above the horizon with the sun in the daytime. And so Mercury has that advantage over Mars because Mars is a nocturnal planet. The nocturnal planets are the moon, Venus, and Mars.
Mm-hmm.
And then Mercury if it rises after the sun. And so Mars has this disadvantage of being on the sunny side of the chart, but being a night planet.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not a big, powerful disadvantage, but it detracts a bit from the prominence of Mars.
Yes.
The same goes for Venus. Venus is fairly weak here. It's cadent. I think it doesn't have much dignity. Oh, it has only dignity by triplicity. It's in detriment, being opposite Taurus. It's in a sign that's sort of opposite its own nature.
Right.
And
That's
it's
not,
a night planet in a day chart above the horizon with the sun. So it's, of the 3 lords of action, Venus is the least strong. And Mercury and Mars are sort of in a race for who is dominant. Mars has dignity by domicile, triply term and face. If we included face, which we didn't, Mars is in its own face. So it has those 4 dignities. Another thing, Mars is the final dispositor of the chart. So if you look at any planet in the chart, it leads you back to Mars. Let's take Saturn. Saturn is in Taurus, ruled by Venus. Venus is in Scorpio, ruled by Mars. Mars rules. Right? So Mars is the final dispositor of these planets. Mars is the final dispositor of all the planets in Scorpio. If we look at the sun in Sag, its dispositor is Jupiter, its dispositor is Venus, its dispositor is Mars. So everything goes back to Mars.
Yeah.
Okay, continuing. Mars mutually opposes to oppose the ascendant ruler. The ascendant ruler is obviously important in all of astrology. It's ruled by Jupiter. And any aspects of the ascendant ruler will certainly affect the personality and sense of identity. If we look at the aspects formed after birth, there's a bunch of lunar aspects, but the first non-lunar aspect, Mars opposes Jupiter on December 1st. He's born November 27th. So Mars has a powerful impact on his personality by aspect. You can see it here. Mars is moving forward. It's at 4. Every day it moves a little bit forward. Eventually it gets to 7 and opposes the Jupiter. The next planet to do that is Venus. So here Venus gets a little boost because it's very shortly after. Venus is moving faster than Mars. So Mars opposes Jupiter, and then shortly after on the same day, Venus opposes Jupiter. So those 2 planets 4 days after birth, both oppose Jupiter, connect to his ascendant ruler, and color his personality. So he gets a boost of Venus here. You
I
see what
think,
I'm talking about?
yeah, yes. I think I was also thinking in terms of his health, and early death, that, his Mars is so prominent because it's the final dispositor. But first of all, we
Right.
have a malefic sun on the ascendant. Then we
Right.
have Mars aspecting strongly his ascendant lord, Jupiter. And then, of course, Saturn is also there and doing it
Right.
from the 12th house.
They're going to both oppose Saturn in the 6th of illness. And the ruler of
Yes.
the 8th is the moon, which is right here, conjunct Mars.
And also the ruler of the 6th is also there with Mars. So
right, and the ruler of the 6th, these two are right with the moon, which rules death, right?
And then also the fact that Mars is a cruel planet for a day chart here, aspecting makes Mars very malefic, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and also ruling Scorpio the 8th.
Right, it enhances the malefic nature of Mars to be a night planet in the day chart, yeah.
So, and it's also his lot of fortune is also there. Yeah.
Right.
Interesting.
So continuing, heliacal rising. When a planet rises, when planets are near the sun, they're invisible because the sun's light doesn't let you see them. And at some point, they separate enough from the sun where you can finally see them again at sunrise or sunset. And these are called heliacal risings, heliacal settings, because heliacal means with reference to the sun. He had his heliacal rising of Mercury on November 24th. He's born the 27th. So remember, we had to look 7 days before and 7 days after. So here Mercury's stressed again by, not only did it rise before the sun, but it rose very close to his birth before the sun. Now, there's two ways the Greeks measured heliacal rising. They used an average of 15 degrees before after the sun, but they also used, for each specific planet, because planets varied in how bright they were, that 15 degrees might be more or less. Like Venus and Mars could be seen only 8 degrees before the sun, or away from the sun, because they were so bright. Mercury, being a tiny planet, you really had to wait till it was about 19 degrees away from the sun to see it. And so this is the chart for when Mercury was 19 away from the sun, 3 days before his birth. Though the only point is that when a planet suddenly becomes visible from having been invisible, or suddenly disappears after having been visible within 7 days of birth, that is especially prominent in the career and in the life in general. So he has Mercury, by this measure, again emphasized. Remember, he's born on Mercury day during a Mercury hour, and now he has a Mercury heliacal rising 3 days before his birth. Mercury also made a station. It had turned, if we look here, this is 3 days before his birth. It's direct. And this is 3 days before that. It was retrograde and became stationary and turned direct. When a planet makes a station within 7 degrees, days either side of the birth, that also gives it special prominence.
Yep.
So Mercury now had a heliacal rising. It made a station. He's born on a Mercury day during a Mercury hour, and it's a masculine planet in a day chart above the horizon with the sun. So Mercury really stands out here as probably the most prominent planet in this chart. Action planet, followed closely by Mars, because Mercury has to filter through Mars to act. Ptolemy's criteria. I think let's see, observe whether any planet makes its oriental appearance. We read this already initially. Be positive in midheaven or receives an application of the moon. In Bruce Lee's chart, Mercury's rising heliacally, receives an application of the moon. There's no planet in the 10th, but Mercury rules the 10th. And the midheaven lies in Virgo in the terms of Mars. I don't know if we saw that. So again, there's that Mercury-Mars connection. Mercury meets two of Ptolemy's three criteria, can be considered his professional indicator. Mars is strongly highlighted, so his actions will be a combination of Mercury and Mars.
Yeah.
Continuing, advancing and retreating. This is, in Seven Stars, he does discuss this concept. The idea here is that planets rise in the east, culminate in the midheaven, set in the west. The closer they are to that angle that they're approaching, the more prominent they are, and they're called advancing toward that angle, just advancing.
Mm-hmm.
When they pass the angle and start sinking again, they're called retreating. And so when they're approaching an angle in 15 degrees, they're very loud. It's like the volume is turned up on a stereo system. And when they're 5 degrees either side of the angle, because now they're in conjunction with it, they're considered at full volume.
Yes.
And then after they're cadent 5 degrees, the volume just suddenly drops off quickly. And the porphyry house system was used largely to do this, sometimes the Alcibiades, but we'll stick to porphyry. So here, if we look at the volume of planets by this measure of advancing and retreating, we can see that the sun is extremely loud. It's 1 degree from the ascendant. Mm-hmm. Being 1 degree from an angle, it's like you turn your stereo up full volume to blast the sun, whatever the sun is singing about. But the next planet, as we rise toward the midheaven, Venus is pretty loud, moderately loud. It's in a succedent house, but it's approaching the midheaven. Cadent is very quiet. This is moderate, and this is very loud, and this is extremely loud. Right? Mm-hmm. But Venus is very close to Mars, they're about 3 degrees apart. So Venus is a little louder than Mars, but they're both noticeable in his career. So by this measure, we get Venus getting somewhat prominent. And Venus also aspects to Jupiter. So Venus is third, I think, in prominence, but it's not unnoticeable.
Right. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, sure. No, please go on. Yeah.
Okay. Masculine, feminine signs. This is another Hellenistic concept. The signs are divided. I think in Jyotish you do this too. The odd numbered signs are considered more masculine, positive, active, solar. Even numbered signs are considered more feminine, yin-like, receptive, laid back.
Yes.
And in Bruce Lee's chart, Mercury rises ahead of the sun. It's considered, quote, masculine or diurnal. But it's in Scorpio, which is a feminine sign. So that makes it a little harder for Mercury to act. Mars is a nocturnal feminine planet in a feminine sign. So it rejoices in the feminine sign. It makes it a little more easy to act. Venus is a nocturnal planet in Scorpio, feminine sign. So that gives Venus a little boost as well. These are like tweaks on the measures. Sure. So my summary was that Mercury seems to meet Ptolemy's criteria for the professional indicator. Mars disposes Mercury, aspects the ascendant ruler Jupiter, and is the most dignified planet, the one that can most fully and easily express its nature. Venus aspects the ascendant ruler and has moderate volume, will also have an effect on vocation. But I think in that order, Mercury, Mars, and then coming down some Venus. The Lord of Exaltation. I don't know if he discusses this in Seven Stars Astrology, but the lot of exaltation, I should say. The Hellenistic astrologers had a group of lots that were related particularly to the planets, and this lot was called the lot of exaltation, based on the idea that the sun and the moon are exalted at particular degrees in the zodiac. In the Hellenistic zodiac, the sun was exalted in the 19th degree, like 18 to 19 of Aries. I think in Jyotish it's the 10th degree. So there's a difference there.
It is, yeah.
And the moon was exalted in the 3rd degree, which goes from 2 degrees to 3 degrees of Taurus. And so depending on whether it's a day chart, you would calculate this lot of exaltation. You start with the ascendant, you add the degree of exaltation of the sun, and you subtract the longitude of the sun. Eminence means you're exalted. People look up to, they honor you. And one of the measures of this was the exaltation. I calculated Bruce Lee's lot of exaltation, and if I did it right, I got it was at 19 Aries 57 in the fifth house. Well, that's interesting because the lot highlights the fifth house, which is in the entertainment industry, among other things. Right? And the ruler of the lot, the planet that rules this lot, is Mars.
Yeah.
Another stress on Mars. He will be exalted in the field of entertainment through his Mars-like activities. Would be basically, and Mars is with the part of fortune in the first house from the point of view of the part of fortune. So that gives this Mars a little extra boost here. Dignities, I think we may have gone over this. Let's go over it again, because the ascendant is in 6 of Sag. It is ruled by Jupiter. It is in the term of Jupiter. It is in the triplicity whose rulers are Sun, Jupiter, Saturn. It is in the face of Mercury. And the Sun is the planet that most closely applies to the ascendant. So by his ascendant, we see a very solar and Jupiter influence on his personality. The midheaven degree, the 21 of Virgo, is in the sign of Mercury, in the term of Mars, but in the exaltation of Mercury. Mercury is considered to be exalted in Virgo. And by triplicity, the rulers are Venus, Moon, and Mars. So again, Mars with a Venus emphasis here. And in the face of Mercury. And Mars is the planet that most closely aspects the... is that true?
Well, Mars is at 4 degrees, so...
And I think this, what did I say that? No, Mercury is the planet that most closely aspects the MC. I made a mistake here.
Yeah, that's fine.
I think I meant to write Mercury.
Mercury's at 15 degrees, so it's close.
It's at 15. Remember, planets aspecting the angles become prominent.
Yes.
So here we see this mix of Mars and Mercury related to the midheaven. And the nonagesimal. Well, I think I meant here Mars, I should put this down here, closely. I reversed this. Mars aspects the nonagesimal and Mercury closely aspects the midheaven.
Yeah.
But in any case, the point, I made a mistake on this slide.
Oh, that's fine. I mean, it's clear you clarified it, so.
Yeah. And as we said, the ascendant, your talents, your basic personality, and the 10th is what you do in the world. And these have to combine to produce your career. But we're seeing this prominence of Mercury, Mars, with a lot of Sun, Jupiter, and a little bit of Venus mixed in.
Yeah, I think, Mercury, Mars, in terms of angles and trines, right? Mars is the 5th lord and Mercury is the 10th lord. That would make a very powerful yoga or, planetary permutation that gives success. And it's conjunct that also. Mars is super strong in dignity and also conjunct a lot of fortune.
Interestingly, because it was Hellenistic, I hadn't included the modern planets, but here this must have put in the Neptune, which modern astrologers associate with Hollywood, movies, film, dance, theater, is very close to the midheaven. It's actually kind of the most advanced planet in the chart here, right? So if we included the modern planets, we'd see this very strong Neptune as well, which fits his career.
Yes. He also had, besides the Mars, Mercury, he also had the Moon, which is the 8th lord, and also considered an associative lord for a Sagittarius ascendant, which would even make it more powerful. And then he also had Venus as the 6th and 11th lord, which would be considered an evil lord. So that would kind of, drag him away from following his inspiration. And,
Right, but remember, that could relate to his period in adolescence when he was a juvenile delinquent gang member, which actually prompted him to learn martial arts.
Well, and also in terms of how he came to his end, I think he came to his end, we discussed this, after sex in extremely hot weather.
There are biographies that say he met up with his girlfriend, I think in Hong Kong, I'm not sure where it was, and it was extremely hot, humid summer day.
Yes.
And they didn't have air conditioning, and they apparently spent hours in bed having intercourse. He didn't feel well. He went to lay down, and she found him dead. But
Exactly.
he'd had problems before that. He'd sort of passed out on the set, I think, and they never diagnosed what was going on with him.
Right. We will perhaps never know, but it's all happening in the 12th house in Scorpio, Venus in the Scorpio,
But it's quite possible the ultimate stress was this sexual activity for a long period of time in hot weather where you really couldn't cool your body. So he may have had hyperthermia, which exacerbated whatever was going on with him otherwise.
Yes, I think that 12th house is very interesting. It gives him so much prominence on the one hand, and on the other hand, it also is so malefic. I mean, Moon is the 8th lord. It's in Scorpio 12th house. Scorpio in itself is already an 8th connotation, and then Venus also in the 12th there. Yeah, it's an interesting configuration there. But you were saying, Anthony, about so we had the applying aspect from Mercury closest to the MC, but then from
Mercury
Mars to
the MC, and the Mars is the closest to the non-adjustable, which is at 6 of Virgo.
Yes.
Which I think is in the terms of Mercury, right? Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so moving on. This just repeats what we said. Mars has moderate volume in terms of advancing, but has the most essential dignity, closely aspects the ascendant ruler. It rules a lot of exaltation in Aries in the 5th, and it's the final dispositor of the chart. Mercury has dignity by term, has low volume being cadent, but it's highlighted by its heliacal rising and having made a station, two very prominent factors in Hellenistic. And it's a diurnal planet in a diurnal chart, which gives it a boost because it's with the sun. Venus has the least dignity, has only moderate volume, but it is tied to the ascendant ruler, and it's a nocturnal planet in a nocturnal sign. So all 3 lords of action seem to affect his profession. Venus is the least powerful indicator. Mars and Mercury are both strong. Oh, here I said Mars may have a slight edge over Mercury. I think because Mars is the most dignified and final dispositor, but you could equally argue Mercury is stronger because it has the heliacal rising at Maida station, and it's the closest in aspect to the mid-heaven. So I think I would probably change my mind and put Mercury first and Mars second.
Yeah, I was thinking,
I'd rewrite that.
Doesn't Mercury become more powerful when it's occidental?
In a day chart, yeah.
That's in a day chart. Right,
Mercury's
so you're looking at
masculine, and so it's on the same side of the horizon as the sun, which makes it more powerful. Yeah.
Right.
So I think I'd go with Mercury here, and with Mars as a close second.
Yeah, I mean,
when I first wrote this, I was impressed by the Mars, but Mars ruling a lot of exaltation. It's really a judgment call here. They're very close.
Yeah, but I think he's best known for being an actor, right? I mean, he made movies, what people know him for, martial arts movies and so on. But I mean, I think Mercury would more speak to that as, being an actor and so on, changing roles and being also versatile in his skills and so on.
So next I looked up in Rhetorius, the 6th century Egyptian, what happens when Mercury and Mars combine regarding profession. So this is what he wrote. When Mercury is the most influential lord of action, It makes secretaries, businessmen, bankers, soothsayers like astrologers, physicians, sacrificers, lawyers, orators, those who work with writing, giving and receiving, meaning buying and selling. But when Mars is present with this prominent Mercury, it makes sacrificers, surgeons, those who bear arms. This is him with his nunchucks, or trades working with iron and fire. So that fits. He certainly bore arms. When Mars is the most influential, so I was undecided whether to think Mercury or Mars was, but it's very similar. It makes stonecutters, carpenters, stone masons. And when Mercury is present with this most influential Mars, sculptors, trades involving fire and iron, again, armorers. I think usually that means people who make arms, but in the previous section, he said people who bear arms as well. So I think we could include people who bear arms, again, comes up. Prosecutors, adulterous persons, makers of sacred monuments, modelers, physicians, surgeons, evildoers, and forgers. And if Jupiter aspects, remember Jupiter's opposite both as Mercury and Mars in this chart, those who are fond of fighting, men of action, fearsome persons, meddlesome, and those who manage the affairs of others. So here you're seeing now Rhetorius is combining. He says, Mercury and Mars are both prominent, but Jupiter is opposing both of them. And so we have to include the influence of Jupiter here. And this is somebody fond of fighting, a man of action, and someone who people are afraid of, or I guess in his movies they were. If Mercury and Mars are together, assuming lordship of action, which I think in this case, in this chart, they almost are equivalent. They both have a lot of strengths and a lot of weaknesses. They produce sculptors, armorers again, makers of sacred monuments. Oh, this is from Ptolemy. Rhetorius basically copied and rewrote Ptolemy and put his own twist on it. Wrestlers. Ptolemy included wrestlers, people who fight hand-to-hand combat here. And if Saturn testifies to them, remember Saturn was with Jupiter opposing them. Murderers, sneak thieves, he was a delinquent of sorts, gang member. Burglars, pirates, cattle thieves, and villains. And if Jupiter testifies, men-at-arms, duelists, people who engage in dueling, energetic, clever persons, busybodies who meddle in others' affairs. So this is how the Hellenistic authors would put all this together. I think they would say Mercury probably most prominent, Mars a very close second. So we're looking at Mercury and Mars together. Then what modifies Mercury and Mars? It's the Jupiter-Saturn opposing them. And so this is the list of possibilities.
Yes.
If he were born 2,000 years ago.
You know, looking at it from the Gemini angle, we would look at the planet with the highest, degree, longitude degree.
Mm-hmm.
And that was Mercury, right, in his horoscope?
I think so, the Atmakaraka, yeah.
Right, and it's in the sign of Mars, so that also...
But it was at 15 and
it's
nothing else was at 15, right?
Yeah. So I think that's also confirming.
Whoops, I'm going wrong. Well, here's the chart again.
Yeah, so Mercury is the planet with the highest degree. It's excluding the outer planets.
Right, excuse me. This has the outer planets, which is interesting to put them in. Because now we have Uranus opposing these planets, and the moon is the ruler of the eighth, so this could be unexpected sudden death. Yeah, and that's the end. So I guess I ended up voting that he was more like Hermes than the other gods, and but the other gods, especially Mars and Jupiter, Saturn, influenced him.
Yeah, Anthony, thank you very much for putting in all the work. I think people have a lot of information to work with and to start testing also, and just looking at charts and get a feel for it. Right?
Well, it was fun, and I learned a lot doing it. And I think the hardest thing is taking the old Hellenistic texts and translating those into modern occupations. Because nowadays we don't consider adultery an occupation, or priests who make sacrifices. I guess there's still some of them, but
yeah, they also have lots for that, like adultery. They have, I think, yeah, I think if you have these prominent planets and you can pick them out for the person, and then in the reading just talk about what they are, what they actually want.
right.
It's very powerful. So we don't need to know all these details. I mean, I think sometimes it's really amazing how much detail you can get out of it, especially also including the 12th parts, or the Vada Samsa.
I personally don't think you can pinpoint an occupation precisely without other information.
Sure, yeah.
But like in this chart, I mean, clearly Bruce Lee, strongly mercurial, strongly Martian, with a good measure of Venus and the Sun thrown in. But how that's who would predict that he'll become a martial artist who creates his own form of martial arts and writes a book on philosophy? I mean, I can't do that level of precision.
Right. I think that's also not really necessary.
Yeah.
It's just bringing up what the person is, wants to cultivate more. I think that's the thing also, is that people actually know what they want, but sometimes it's a lack of confidence, or not even thinking of that possibility that kind of prevents them or blocks them from actually pursuing something.
One thing that impressed me with this technique that I sort of knew but didn't appreciate is you're not just looking at the natal chart, you're looking at the period 7 days before to 7 days after. So you're looking at a point in time, but then what led up to that, what followed it, and how does all of that 15-day influence reflect the person?
Yes.
What rose within 7 days, what had a station within 7 days, things like that. What was the new or full moon before the birth doing? What was that moon aspecting? You're really looking at the whole development over a period of time, where the chart is just one point that's the highlight, the high point, but is influenced by everything happening before and after.
Yes,
to me, that was striking.
Are all contributing to getting a feel for what is. I mean, when things are piling up and keep pushing in that direction, like in his case, Mercury being very, very prominent, it gives you more confidence as an astrologer to make an assessment. Wonderful.
Also, I think modern astrologers don't pay that much attention to the ruler of the day and the ruler of the hour of birth, but I think those are really important.
Sure.
Especially the Lord of the hour of birth. That seems to be a very prominent factor in this.
Yes. Okay, so again, thank you very much, Anthony, for this lecture. And
okay, it was my pleasure to do it.
Wonderful. Talk to you sometime later. Bye.
Okay, take care. Bye.
Bye.